Hey guys, Corey here from Ant Brothers Electric. We've got our new Ace bike here, as you can see. We're just going to do a bit of a video today as to how to assemble it, how to operate it, and just a few pointers as to how to get you going. So let's jump in and get into it, eh? Alrighty guys, once you've got your bike out of the box, the first thing you want to do is obviously get all your zip ties and packaging off. Just be very careful when you do so that you don't scratch any of your paint and things like that. Another thing I just wanted to note is when you're taking all the packaging off, keep aside some of these zip ties. They are very handy and I'll show you a little trick later in the video. Okay, once you've unpacked everything, you'll find that you've got your front wheel. Obviously, this little package in here is your front axle. We'll get to that in a minute. If you've purchased during the promo in November, you will get the free cargo rack for the rear. You've got your front fender, front headlight, and our box here has some basic tools, user manual, your foot pegs, your rear passenger pegs. Don't be alarmed, these are just spare bolts and whatnot here. And then obviously your charger. Okay, so the next step here is to get the front wheel on. I find that once the front wheel's on, you can stand the bike up and assemble the rest of the bike a lot easier. Now, I don't know if you can see this here, but there's a plastic clip holding the forks together. We just want to pop that off and get that out of the way so we can get our front wheel on. Okay, so once we've got our front wheel, just going back to that clip that was in the front, throw that away, we won't need that. Once we've pulled our little axle here out of the rim, now all we're going to do is untwist the end, pull the second last spring off, and slide that through. Okay, so once we've slopped that through, we're going to get the spring, putting the small end on first, and then putting our cap on and just twisting it up a couple of turns. So we've got room to slot our forks onto the axle. Okay, so once you got that axle in, it should look something like this with the space in between, obviously, to slot our forks on. Alright, once we've got our axle on, we're going to bring our wheel over, making sure that the disc is on the same side as our hydraulic clamp or mechanical clamp, depending on which model you've got. Now, if you've got a friend or someone at home, it does help to get two hands for this one. But all we're going to do is lift these forks up and slot them onto the axle. As you can see now, the fork is bang in between here on the axle with the nut on this side, and it should look very much the same on this side as well. Perfect. Now, if you have mechanical disc brakes, this model is an XMT, so we've got hydraulic disc brakes. If you have mechanical disc brakes, your clamp assembly may already be fixed on. So you'll just need to make sure that when you put the wheel on, that the disc rotor slides nice in between the in between the pads. Now on our hydraulic ones, we've got this little plastic clamp in here to stop the pads from closing up. Okay, now when we slot it in, we want that disc to go nice and clean between this gap here, and the caliper is going to sit behind the fitting here. You might just need to give it a bit of a push and line the two holes up. So that's how we should look. As you can see, I've got the caliper on this side and the fork attachment on this side. Now just coming back to our axle, we want to tighten it up from this side, making sure that the wheel is relatively straight so we're not twisting or anything like that. We want to tighten this up, and once it's semi-tight, all we want to do is come around here to our clamp and pull this tight. Now that's not tight enough, so on the other side I'm just going to keep turning until it's firm. And that's pretty tight. Pull that nice and tight there. Alright, and we're just going to nip those up. So now that our front wheel is on, we want to come up here to the top where our handlebars are going to slot in, and just make sure that these two bolts on either side are somewhat relatively loose as possible. Once we've loosened off, we want to get our handlebars, making sure that the gear shifter is on the right hand side. So when we're putting our handlebars in, we probably do need to give it quite some force sometimes to get them in, but you'll see there's a top marked line here. That is the line that you really need to at least get it into. Once we've got our handlebars to a good height, and ideally to your safety line, you want to just tighten these 4 bolts up on each side. Okay, so once we've tightened our handlebars, we want to come down to our front fender. Now, the easiest way to understand this is you'll see here there's a bit of a lip. That is basically the back, I guess you could say. Alright, once we've got our fender in position here, we've got our washer on the bolt. Just going to line it up, slot the bolt through, and put the nut on the reverse side. Keep in mind, if you have the front suspension model, you need to make sure that you adjust your fender as high as possible, because when your suspension compresses, when you hit a bump, that tyre is going to move up close to that fender. So we want to make sure that that's adjusted up as high as possible. And there we go. That's how yours should look. Alright, so here we are. This is what your Ace should be looking like about now. Obviously we've still got to do our pedals. We still need to do our headlight, adjust the angles of the display and buttons and things like that. Alright, now for our pedals. I can't stress this enough. There is a left and a right pedal. If you force it in the wrong way, you're going to damage the thread in here, and you're going to have some serious problems. So make sure you figure out which one is your left and right. The left hand side one is reverse threaded, so we're actually going to tighten it to the left side. And just to confuse you, your right hand side pedal is actually going to tighten the right way. So clockwise. Alright, then we're going to get our 16mm and just tighten them up. Alright, headlight is very easy. All we're going to do is take these two bolts out here and slot our headlight in like so and pop the bolts back through, tighten it up and adjust it to whatever angle you want and then tighten her up. Alright, so we've got our headlight connected in. You can see here I've got the two arrows lining up together. We've used these quick connectors on a few other components as well. It just means if something happens, you damage a headlight or something like that, we can send you out a new one and just plug it in and away you go. As I mentioned earlier in the video on keeping a zip tie, you can actually pull these cables around and just put a zip tie around the head post. Doesn't need to be tight, just to hold it there, and that will just finish your bike off that little bit more. Headlight. To turn the actual headlight on, we want to hold down the plus button and you'll see our headlight is on. This switch here is going to activate our DRL ring on and off, which you probably can't see here, which I'll show you. Alright, so you can see I have the headlight on now. I'll show you the DRL, which is by the switch. And then the plus button turns off our headlight. Alright, so one other handy tip that a lot of people don't know is that if you hold down the minus button, that's actually going to throttle the bike up to roughly 5 or 6 kilometers tops, just to get you moving, and then you can start pedaling or whatnot. So if, let's say for example, you're on a bit of an incline or something like that and can't quite pedal to get the bike going, you can actually hold the minus button, and I shouldn't probably do this in the office, but you can see it'll start moving the bike to help get you going, which is a really cool feature that a lot of people don't know. Just want to make sure too, when you go through your setup on the bike, just check that everything's kind of firm and not twisting like the screen here is. If you do tighten up these, this button system, the light switch, the display, they do have plastic housing, so they really don't need to be tight at all. If you tighten them too much, it'll actually probably crack the plastic, which is not good. You don't need to over tighten these at all. To be fair, like if there's a little bit of movement there, that's fine, it's not going to go anywhere. We also have our cup holder here, which is a very favoured feature. Absolutely love it on this bike. You can actually adjust it in and out to suit the style of cup that you may have. If you like a large coffee, well then kudos, that's going to be perfect. Alright, so just some final points. You'd want to check tighten these bolts on the rotors of the brakes, front and rear discs. Just check that they're firm. Generally they are, and they're pretty good. Your bottom fork clamps here, definitely check those. Our kickstand bolts, definitely tighten those. If you don't want to put the cargo rack on the rear, I would probably remove that if I was you, just because it rattles around and can be a bit noisy. Alright, so the last step in the process is to inflate your tyres. We run our tyres on a 20 psi as a standard. The tyres are rated for up to about 30 psi, but 20 psi is definitely a good all-round pressure. If you're doing a bit of beach work, you might want to lower that down a little bit. If you're carrying a bit more weight, maybe you might want to pump it up a bit more. But from the factory, they are going to be a bit low, so definitely do that before you jump on the bike. Head down to your local servo or something like that if you don't have a bike pump, and just pump those up to about 20 psi, and you're all set to go.